Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining on the occasion of the launch of IFIT's Narrative Peacebuilding Hub, an open online resource with in-depth information and practical guidance on how to enrich national narrative landscapes so as to diminish the influence of the simplified stories that often drive conflict and polarization. My name is Mark Freeman. I'm the founder and executive director of the Institute for Integrated Transitions. The hub that we've just launched contains a mixture of policy papers, practice briefs, videos, toolkits, and lots of other resources that were developed by IFIT's Inclusive Narratives Practice Group in partnership with IFIT Country Brain Trust and other experts. And it's meant to serve as a platform for practitioners, policymakers, and donors to access and exchange knowledge on the intersection of narrative and peace building. The hub actually emerges out of many, many years of prior work, in particular through our country work and through the efforts of the Inclusive Narratives Practice Group that we created a number of years ago. We want to share a little bit about the substance of IFIT's narrative peace building approach, which is reflected in the hub. And so today's conversation, we're very fortunate to have three expert guests join us. One is Dr. Sara Cobb, who's a leading expert globally on narrative and conflict. Sara is Professor Emerita at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University, and she's a member of IFIT's Inclusive Narratives Practice Group. Jescah Otieno is a Kenyan peace practitioner and communication specialist. She is a researcher at the National Cohesion and Integration Commission of Kenya, and she is leading the Commission's narrative transformation efforts in the country. And finally, Alejandra González Ferro is a research associate at IFIT based in our Bogota office. And Alejandra coordinates our national brain trusts in Colombia and our narrative peace building initiatives in Latin America. So let's kick things off. I'm going to turn to you first, Sara. You've had an instrumental role conceptually, strategically in helping IFIT and all of our experts to really think critically and strategically about narratives and peace building. So maybe I can just begin by asking you why narrative, in your view, why narrative is important to peace building, and how IFIT's narrative peace building approach fills a gap.
Oh, thank you, Mark. And I wanted to compliment IFIT on the launch of this resource hub, because I think it's a fabulous contribution to peace builders all over the world to begin to think from a narrative lens. So I'm looking forward to the impact of it and to its enrichment over time. Narrative is an incredible resource for peace building, and in the following way. Narrative is the architecture, it's the deep structure of meaning making. So because action is driven by meaning, the people do things on the basis of what it means to them. It's absolutely central for social change and for conflict reduction and peace building more broadly. Now, there's some good news and bad news. And I think our model that we developed through IFIT reflects or addresses some of these strengths and limitations. So let me start out with the limitations. Now, narrative is, because it is the architecture, it basically is it's got this, it's already set. It's, got some structure to it. It's organized by culture. It's laid down through lived experience. It is reinforced through social interactions in communities and in nations. So when conflicts take hold, they're based on these stories that have already been, in development for quite a long time and are anchored in incredibly thick ways in social systems. So that's the bad news, right? You get these dominant stories that are very, very difficult to change. One of the things the IFIT tree model recommends, and we think the tree model is basically, you got to, like a tree, you've got sort of narrative roots that are derived from culture and history and experience, and you have they feed these trunks, which are basically big dominant stories that are bundled together and pretty stiff and rigid. And those materialize themselves in the branches, which are basically the policies and practices that are derived from those big master stories, which are fed by those roots. So the model would suggest that you don't do peace building by coming in and figuring out what the trunks are and trying to change these stories, as a manipulate them or strategically reorganize them. That's not going to work. In fact, all the narratives do then, these dominant stories, is protect themselves from you, and you become, X marks the spot for being zeroed out. So if you want to participate in peace building from a narrative lens, you've really got to think about the development of the roots and the materialization of new policies and practices. Those are the places where you can support the evolution of meaning. But the good news, I want to get to the good news, and it's also reflected in the model, is that narratives as systems are anchored by key words and component parts. And that's just brilliant, because that's wonderful for us as peace builders, because evolution to any one of those central key words, or these central values, or central descriptions of the characters, or plot lines about what's happened in the past and what's going to happen in the future, any of those narrative components, evolution of those changes the whole system. So the focus then is on not creating one unified story that everybody's going to tell. That's not the direction for peace building. It is the evolution of these stories. And they can be minor evolutions that lead to new kinds of interactions, that lead to new relationships, that begin to shift policies. They don't have to be, you don't have to do all the work at once. In fact, narrative is going to help you out by shifting itself in response to the evolution of meaning. So, that's what makes peace building from a narrative lens, absolutely foundational, and I think an incredibly rich source. Then we got some tough questions like, okay, how do you do that? It's not an issue, because we have a lot of strategies, and the hub offers, through some of the case studies and the field work and some of the policy papers that are written, ways to do analysis that then have import for how do you actually do the practice. And I think the hub is a good resource for the practical questions about how to support the evolution of meaning. But the really great thing about the hub, I think, and this is my last comment, the really great thing about the hub is that I think it's intended to be a bottom-up source for the world, actually, and not somebody like me sitting around teaching, providing instruction to everybody like a professor does, professing, but more bottom up in the sense that people can actually use this framework and use these lenses and advance the practice of narrative change in the course of the work they're doing in these countries. And I'm really excited to hear from the other two panelists, Jescah and Alejandra, on the ways in which it's made sense to them. And I think then collectively, we all get wiser and smarter, because the work is not sort of centralized and then pushed out. It's coming in from all these, practitioner sites where people are getting smart. And I'm looking forward to learning with everybody. Thank you.
Well, that's fantastic, Sara. Thank you so much for the kind words, but also just for giving us a combination of a theoretical and a practical perspective in just 5 minutes. We'll come back to you in a moment, but let me just move now in the spirit of practice and applying some of these ideas. Let me pass now to you, Jescah. In Kenya, the National Cohesion and Integration Commission, where you work, has begun a narrative transformation process from scratch, starting with a national narrative mapping process that will lead into eventually a strategic planning and implementation of narrative change set of interventions. Can you tell us a bit about how the Commission has applied a narrative peace-building approach in Kenya thus far, and any lessons that you want to share? That would be very welcome. So over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Indeed, thank you for having me. And on behalf of the Commission, let me say that we are honored really to be part of this. And so, as you rightly put it, the National Cohesion and Integration Commission has actually applied the narrative approach as a brand new approach. Remember, the Commission was born out of a post-election violence in 2007, 2008. And really, this was as a result of a kind of discord between the two main protagonists then, the incumbent president and the opposition leader. And so the two who are from the Kikuyu and Luo communities respectively have, sort of seen conflicts between their communities, and this goes all the way back to independence times. This has led to mistrust, has led to conflicts, inter-ethnic conflicts between the two communities, as well as other communities, And so the Commission, having been born to ensure that Kenyans coexist peacefully, irrespective of their ethnic communities, really we have been in existence for over 14 years. And one of the things we asked ourselves is that we have applied various strategies, whether we are talking about mediation, whether we are talking about public outreaches, whether we are looking at advocacy, including the hard approach, we have taken people to court. But really, we have not attained that ultimate social cohesion that we would want to. And so we said, why not do things differently? And that is the reason why we decided to apply the narrative approach. And so what we have done is that we have, as you rightly put it, looked at the three key stages of this approach: the assessment stage, strategic planning stage, as well as the implementation stage. We are currently at the assessment stage, where we have conducted sort of a mapping exercise. But it is important for me to say that even prior to doing this, we did conduct a comprehensive literature review just to look at what other people have said, whether we are talking about published documents, media pieces, and the like. And so we sampled 13 out of the 47 counties of Kenya, 5 of them that are predominantly occupied by the Luo community, 5 of them predominantly occupied by the Kikuyu community, and the remaining 3, what I would call control counties, not occupied by the rest of the communities, all right? And so we have so far collected data from one community, that is the Luo community, of course, with plans to reach out to the other communities in the coming months. So we have conducted a mapping exercise, just looking at the roots that Sarah just talked about, the trunks and the branches and all that, using sketches, sticky notes. And one of the key questions we've been asking is, what narratives of the different communities are there? What do you think of yourself as a community, but also in relation to the other community, okay? Remember, Kenya has over 44 ethnic communities, but we are currently focusing on only 2, with the hope, of course, that we will expand this. Now, let me say this, that so far, looking at the narratives, that are coming out, we are looking at how the Luo community, for example, is viewing itself. First of all, they sort of saying that, yes, the other communities are saying they're proud, but at the same time accepting that, all right, fine, we are proud, but even if we are proud, then there are positive issues that we think that we possess as a community, okay? And so we hope that through giving space for all these narratives, however minute, however lesser narratives they could be, that we want to open up the landscape, okay? open up the space for communities to talk about their past, for communities to talk about their issues, what they think about themselves, as well as others, just to have them recollect their past and talk about this. So what are the key lessons that we have learned? First of all, I would say that one of the lessons that we have learned is the need for psychosocial support, all right? Remember, Kenya has had a history of violence coming around, especially during election times. And so as communities talk about themselves, talk about their issues, then some of these discussions really provoke emotions. The past is rekindled. And as a commission, we think about it and pause and say, wait a minute, the post-election ghost is yet to go. There's need for us to conduct psychosocial support even as we go along. But number two, it is very critical that we realize that it is easier for a community to talk about another community than it is to talk about themselves. And one of the things we've done is to ask them, okay, tell us about yourself. Check yourself as a community. What do you think about yourself? And one of the critical things that the Luo community was saying, for example, is that yes, we are proud, but we have the mind. We are also very key in terms of issues of development. Some of them giving examples, including of how they have produced one of their own, the President Barack Obama of the former president of the US, Barack Obama. And some of these issues really have us ask ourselves, what is it when you ask our community to really check themselves rather than check the other community? And so for us, the third and most critical lesson that we are learning is that the aim is not to kill, the aim is not to fight, the aim is not to subdue these narratives, but really to expand the landscape. And so we are a diversity commission, and we are saying that it doesn't matter the lesser narratives, let us give space for people to be heard, because this is what is going to give us the peaceful coexistence that we desire. Thank you.
It's fantastic, Jescah. Thank you very much for sharing all of that. I should have said that our Inclusive Narratives Practice Group has the privilege also of accompanying your commission with this work, and we're learning a lot as well through the process. So thank you very much. And maybe making a connection also with the very last thing that you said, and before I go to Alejandra, I mean, one of the almost stock phrases of our Inclusive Narrative Practice Group members, and it's reflected throughout the materials in the hub, is, and very much in line with what you just said at the end, Jescah, which is that lasting peace does not come from imposing a narrative and from everyone telling the same story. It emerges in societies where many complex, diverse narratives are encouraged to thrive together. And I'm using that as a segue maybe to turn to you now, Alejandra, and share a different perspective where you are in Colombia, and to tell us about the approach to narrative peace building that IFIT has applied there, including through the country brain trusts that we've had there for over 7 years now. So please, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone who is connected with us today. It's a pleasure to be here. Sara, thank you for that great explanation, and Jescah for sharing this amazing experience and lessons learned from Kenya. So I would like to share how we decided to integrate narrative work, including the narrative framework, into IFIT's brain trust work in Colombia specifically, and start by sharing broadly the main purpose of our work in Colombia. Here, basically, we mainly contribute to the advancement of peace efforts through the provision of expert advice on key peace-building related issues such as transitional justice, security, local development. And the core of our work is 2 brain trusts, that is groups of local experts, one at the national level and another at the subnational level, representing some of the regions most affected by conflict. So in Colombia, the peace-building debate over the last years has been permeated by high doses of polarization and divisive us versus them narratives. And in this scenario, narratives become a tool of our work, like a means towards our end. Our goal is to contribute to peace building, but we can do that if we don't address the underlying narratives and stories that people in society tell about each other. So how we perceive combatants, ex-combatants, military, civil society, state institutions, etc. So the story is incomplete if we don't look into narratives. And in this sense, we realized that it didn't make sense to treat narrative work as a compartmentalized additional area we would work on, but rather a tool that could permeate all of our actions and thus take us a step closer to our goal. And something that is very important is the context, because the context fluctuates widely and we need to be on top of it. So part of our work is to use narrative tools to navigate this context. And another one is to identify windows of opportunity to contribute to enrich the narrative landscape. So with that, I would like to bring two concrete examples to illustrate our work. The first one is we integrate narratives into our daily activities by using narrative tools as part of our meeting methodology. So we often have meetings with actors with divergent views, or even actors that do not necessarily talk to each other. And we just need to find a way to build a common ground, at least for the meeting, let's say so. So we use narrative tools to plan our meetings, to ideate the spaces we work in, and to access the kind of audience we want to target. So for instance, we try to find common values that Sara was naming them, or actions when talking about difficult topics through, let's say, building premises to be able to have like inclusive conversations. So like some of common premises that usually are based on technical components of the things or topics we talk about. Another example is we have specific initiatives that seek to impact the context. So during the presidential electoral period of 2022, we created a toolkit for constructive dialogue in polarized context that you will find in the hub. There's the tools and there's a practice brief on the whole process of how we did it. It's there. So the motto of this toolkit was give your opinion without insulting, hold a conversation without judging, and ask a question without attacking. That's not easy, but we try to create some tools for that. So the toolkit has 6 tools that are meant to be used among persons with opposing views on a given topic, where the conversation has already escalated to the use of pejorative language and limited listening. The toolkit does not aim to generate consensus or agreement around a given topic. Instead, it promotes viewpoint plurality and the idea that we can and should talk with those whose views are different to our own. I would say our most successful story of impact was when one of the tools of this toolkit that it's called, or we call it pat on the back. For those who speak Spanish, it's called échale flores, that seeks to acknowledge positive things about the other's position. And it was used in a university debate with presidential candidates. And the use of the tool led to shift the tone of the debate as candidates were talking. And that was super powerful because they used to refer to each other not in the nicest terms in the past. So started recognizing something positive about each other was like a new way of a conversation. And this shift was rarely ever seen in a debate. So it was like positively valued by the public. So along this process, and I'm going to close with this, of using the narrative lens in our work, we identified multiple lessons learned, and we've learned a lot on the way. But I want to share just 3 things. The first one, when we talk about human relations, it's a lot about emotions. It seems minor, but it's not. So the acknowledgement of emotions is key. The second one is working in the peace building field. Lots of the work has to do with building bridges among opponents or even among, let's say, former enemies. So having awareness of the dynamic of narratives is incredibly powerful tool to do this work. And Sara already named it, and Jescah explained how in Kenya it's that way. So in our experience, what has worked is to take, like, let's say, an incremental approach. So you first start talking with those who are closer to you, those who think alike, and those with whom there is already, let's say, a minimum common ground. And from there, you begin like growing the circle. And the third lesson I want to share, it's the importance or the value of including sectors from other disciplines and fields, let's say such as the creative sector. So they work with narratives daily, and their knowledge and inputs are very valuable for the work we do. So let's say by consulting artists, writers, in other cases, politicians, among others, we have gained new insights into how narratives and polarization are addressed in different fields. And we did so for creating the toolkit to get like basic ideas and understanding different actors, and basically understanding the relevance and power of stereotypes in folk cultures and how they translate into politics, and how that has enabled us to better understand the preconceptions that prevent important conversations from happening. But I'll leave it there so we can move into more of a conversation. Thank you.
Well, that's great. That's another very vivid set of examples of these ideas put into practice for, you know, with peace building aims. So thank you very much for sharing that, Alejandra. Maybe I'll give you each an opportunity just before we open up to others for comments and questions. I'll maybe give you each a chance to react to each other or to one question that I'm just going to put out there. And it has to do, I guess it goes back a little bit to the word you said at the very outset, Sara, which is the word architecture. And I guess I would ask, you know, each of you, if you wish to comment on this, as I said, you can also just respond or react to what you've heard from the other panelists. But, you know, how should we think about the architecture of narratives in a physical sense? Is it something inside of us? Is it something out there, or is it both? And I ask that because, I mean, there's a phrase that's used in a paper written by one of the members of our inclusive narratives practice group, Refik Hodzic, many years ago, before we even created the inclusive narratives practice group. And it had to do with what he called the illusion in the case of courts, that their judgments could be rendered and that they could exist and operate outside of the dominant narratives, as opposed to what he argued, which is this idea that the narratives are out there, the judgment of a court is rendered, and it's simply embedded into the slot of the narrative that we already inhabit or that's in us. So it's a bit of an abstract question, but I just want to get any reactions from any of you, if you wish, to that idea, like, where is narrative in relation to us? Sara, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, you know, it's been a long time, I think, that we've been as a field of peace building struggling with this. You know, back in the 90s, we thought identity was the problem, remember? And then we put people in workshops and tried to, you know, understand and then change those identities. And it's not going to work because of the web of meaning that folks are, you know, encased in and reproducing. So clearly, narrative is located in the social spaces between people, and we enact them, we reproduce them as folks, you know, and we inhabit them. You use that word, Mark. I think it's a brilliant word, because they don't feel different than us. They feel like we are that, right? So I think the social space is where we have to pay attention, and the examples that both Jescah and Alejandra were giving are of the sort of things that worked. You know, what Alejandra was pointing out about the centrality of emotions and the work that just that little pat on the back exercise they did during the political debate, you know, shifted the grounds. That's evidence of the fact that the spaces that we inhabit collectively are the location for narrative, and you shift that and you can really make things happen. And I also think Jescah's point about, you know, the centrality of trauma, you know, trauma is not something that happens to an individual, right? You can get hit by a bus, but the sort of trauma she's talking about is collective. And so we have to, you know, really follow the work that they're doing and think, well, how do you work collectively? Because the space of those trauma narratives is a social space. So those are some of my thoughts.
That's terrific. Jescah, over to you if you wanted to react to any of this, and then we'll go to Alejandra, and then we'll open up.
Sure. Thank you, Mark. I think for us at the Commission, one of the things that we've kept asking ourselves, for example, is what is this peace? Yeah. What is this animal called peace? And one of the ills that we suffer from as Kenyans is the issue of negative ethnicity. And this really comes out during elections. Before elections, Kenyans are working together, they're living together, they are eating together, doing everything, going to church together. But we ask ourselves sometimes, what is this animal known as ethnicity? How comes, what is it different because I speak a different language from my neighbor that really makes us hate each other? So really, I would say it encompasses everything. It's about who I am, my identity. It's about what surrounds me. It's about my environment, because again, that really determines how people act, their culture, their way of life. So really, it's about us looking at ourselves, not just in terms of our ethnic cocoons, our religious cocoons, but it's about us looking at ourselves as Kenyans, as a people, as human beings. So for me, really, this is all about us going back to our humanity and really interrogating who really we are as human beings. Thank you.
Thank you, Jescah, very much for that. Alejandra, over to you, and then we'll open up.
Thank you, Mark. I was thinking about the question and listening to Sara and Jescah. I think it's like a little bit of both, like when you say what's first, the egg or the hen. And it's because I do feel that if it's a space we inhabit, it's like one self that has like a background and experience and values, like has its own story. So I think I just want to bring one of the lessons that Jescah shared with us, that was it is easier to talk about the other than to talk about ourselves, because we are kind of nurtured with the narrative that is out there, like the narrative that everyone's telling. But when you start like scratching in, and it's what we try to do with the toolkit, and you start looking at oneself's story, then you can understand those like values and the story each person has. And it's like in oneself that can start like changing other things, like to sum up and start changing more collectively the narrative. So I think it's like a little bit of both. And we actually, in the work of peace builders, need to approach it on like both sides, like on a personal way and on a collective way.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Jescah. Thank you, Alejandra. Thank you to all who joined. Just wanted to conclude by saying that the Hub is actually a work in progress. We're just at the beginning, and we want it to evolve, as we continue to test and expand and refine our own approach. And we invite all of you to continue visiting the Hub and engaging with the content as we add more resources and hold more events. And finally, just to acknowledge Sara and the other members of the Inclusive Narratives Practice Group for bringing thought leadership to our organization around these issues, which are really complex. We've learned a lot. Thank you as well to the National Cohesion and Integration Commission and for allowing us to also be part of that process as well and learn from that. And of course, to our colleagues in the Colombian Brain Trust as well for all that we've learned through working on narrative peace building there. So thank you again to everyone, and we'll sign off.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.